So I guess I'm trying to bring that up because there's definitely some kind of concern that citizens of the state would have with regards to revenue bonds, that there have been experiences elsewhere that would cause them some concern. So the big elephant in the room is the tunnels, and I'm just wondering, has anyone penciled that out? You know, if you pencil out the high-speed rail, it will not pencil out. I don't care. The assumptions you make are just going to be crazy. Personal opinion, excuse me. So has anyone done an analysis of whether a revenue bond for the Delta tunnels will pencil out? Or a ratepayer is going to get stuck with some incredible rate increase?
Without extra water being produced.
Yeah. Sorry, Tim.
That would be beyond the purview of our office.
Okay.
Our office would generally receive a proposal from the then current administration to finance a project like that based on a set of assumptions, which of course would then have to be incorporated into our preparation of offering documents. But to date, I'm not aware of anything that's been presented to us to support that.
But this is just, if I can use the term, just a gentleman's debate. We don't do anything with this initiative. We just hear it and just kind of have a polite discussion. So, I was careful. I apologize, young lady. But Mr. Chair, I just want to say that the state treasurer made an exceptional hire in Tim Schaefer.
Exceptional hire. I completely agree.
Thank you very much.
Very bright. Senator Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to ask a question to our treasurer. I apologize for coming a little late, so I'm not sure if you might already answer this question. Based on the $2 billion threshold for state projects, are there any specific projects that the state has built that would have required public vote based on the $2 billion threshold of this initiative?
So with the uncertainty of the measure, we don't know.
What about in the past?
So if they had the $2 billion project, and if you continue, because they had not and they continue to issue more bonds from that prior authorization, then it may be subject to the vote. But that question is unclear. So as we presented in comment, if you sold $1 billion of bonds previously, and you go out and sell another $1 billion of bonds, and then trigger $2 billion, would that be included in the measure, or would it not?
Does anybody have an answer to that? Because, I mean, I'll give you an example. In Orange County, because this also relates to the JPA, the 405 freeway, which touches majority of my entire district, they're looking at a $1.5 billion project of expansion. And that was, I mean, that's the current cost potentially today, but back then it wasn't that much. Now, that was when I was a county supervisor. Today we're projecting 1.3, and it hasn't even started. So it could have been reached $2 billion in a few years when it actually starts. So when does it trigger? Is it when it starts or after the project? Similar to even Governor Wilson, when he did the Bay Bridge, he projected it to be $1.3 billion, 97, and then the final cost was $6.4 billion. So where's the trigger when it's projected to be $1 billion, and then 2 years later becomes $2 billion? So then at that market $2 billion, does it go out to the voters? How does that work? Or, I just look at it. It helps us to, I would assume, be more transparent, and also allows us to make sure we have the cost control before we go out to the voters, not just a paper on a statement saying, oh, it's going to cost X today, but knowing that it'll probably be a little more.
Senator Wynn, I think your question is spot on. The issue is unresolved. It's to be determined, and frankly, we need the authors and the others to provide clarification as to what the actual proposal provides to your particular question.
Well, if Mr. Chairman, this is my first time being in a hearing on ballot initiative, and
no, it's the first hearing on a ballot initiative.
Oh, is it? Okay. Sorry, I didn't know.
We're all in this together.
Okay, good. So I'm not the only one. So there's no bad questions. So my understanding that with these kind of initiative, if you reach, like, if the proponent reaches 25% of collecting signatures, that is when negotiations allow between, I guess, us, whether that's you or whoever is involved in terms of the state side, with proponents. And also to perhaps better educate the public why these signatures were gathering. Why didn't we do that until today? We didn't do that last year. Why are we doing it today, and why this initiative is the first initiative to be placed as a hearing, and, well, compared to all the other initiatives that already also qualify. So I'm not sure if that's to the treasurer or somebody else.
Yeah, I wasn't involved with the procedural history on this initiative.
Do we have a staff?
Yeah, Senator, the answer to that question is that there's a couple of different points, just real quickly. First, in the first 25 days, you have the right to make, if someone makes a typographical mistake or some cross-reference or something like that, those kinds of small mistakes can be corrected without having to refile, which used to be the problem. The second thing was there was no interrelationship between the deliberation of the legislative branch and the proponents. Proponents would just go for whatever the issue was. Doesn't matter what it was. Simply gather signatures, put it in the ballot, and there was never a discussion. Then we came up with the law of having a hearing 30 days before the actual vote, which really didn't have any meaning. The hope here is that as the result of great experts analyzing this stuff, can there be a deliberation between the proponent and the legislature where the proponent pulls it off, because we now have a right to withdraw and come up with a compromise? Does the proponent realize that, oh my God, I didn't realize all of these consequences because my objective was 1 and 2 or 3, whatever my objective was, and didn't understand the consequences? It gives us a process. It does not go so far as to allow us to rewrite this now because there's a constitutional issue where people actually have signatures. And they signed on something, and if you fundamentally change that, what's the meaning? There were great debates about that and how that works in terms of Steinberg's measure 1253. So it is somewhat challenging. We have met closer to a middle ground to try to have a better deliberation between the important legislative process and the important initiative process, but it is not perfect.
But I thought Steinberg's bill allow, after about 25% of signatures gathering, is conversation can start to happen between the legislator or the state body and the proponents before all signatures are gathered. The question I asked is it's a question that we could have negotiated or asked the proponent prior to completion of all the signatures gathered.
Right.
And we never did that.
In this instance, I think it's because the signatures gathered really, really early. There's a number of folks that are still gathering now that are just literally sending in letters. I believe, I could be inaccurate, we can ask the proponent, that they just did this so early. We were still in the middle of our cycle last year, and the underlying notion is as we go into the 2016 cycle and we're at the front end of policy discussions, that we can now start engaging in the November ballot this early.
Is this the only initiative that has qualified?
Oh, there's some other ones.
So why didn't we include those other initiatives as a hearing too?
They are different hearings, different jurisdictions, depending upon what the subject matter is.
You're just too early, Mr. You're too organized, too efficient. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of questions, Mr. Treasurer. This document that you have before you that your office provided us called the State Agency Revenue Bonds, you referenced this, but I just want to make it clear. It indicates $26 billion of what's called conduit financing. Can you, in simple terms, explain what conduit financing is?
Sure. It's the issuance of municipal securities by a government agent on behalf of a third party.
So in other words, if I want to reduce healthcare costs and I have an important hospital in a community, that not-for-profit hospital can apply for lower interest rates by using state-issued bonds for which only the hospital is liable and nobody else would be liable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So this is basically a function where the government is using its tax-exempt benefit to benefit private sector endeavors that have public sector benefit. So if you look, for example, your health facilities does hospitals, your educational facilities, small colleges, Stanford, private schools that you get a benefit to. USC, I believe, has a number of different schools. Now, Pepperdine. The next document you have before you is AB 14, and all the members have this, AB 140. It's called Disaster Preparedness and Flood Prevention Bond Act of 2006. I refer you to page 11, section 5096.966. What that says, if I can summarize it briefly, is that any bonds authorized, this is for a general obligation bond, I believe, correct? Meaning that this has the full faith and credit of the taxpayers, and that under this bond measure, the taxpayers are required to pay, correct? Under this measure? Is that correct, Mr. Treasurer? Yeah. And this says that if you refinance this bond, in other words, meaning that it goes out at an interest rate and the interest rates get better and you want to save taxpayers money, you don't have to go back to the people of California to get another vote of the people to lower interest rates. Is that correct?
Because we usually insert language to allow refinancing in the initial bond documents.
Right. That's what you normally do in general obligation bonds. My question to you with respect to the measure that's before us, does that allow refinancing without having to go back to the people?
No, I didn't read that language.
I didn't read it either. That's why I'm asking. So in other words, if you have a situation where you want to, often I know this from my old days, you often at California Health Facilities or Educational Facilities Authority, you want to go out and bundle a bunch of expensive loans in order to reduce interests. And if that bundling is $2 billion, you'd require a vote of the people to be able to reduce interest costs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Senator Nguyen.
Mr. Treasurer, does this have any impact on University of California, UC Systems?
We have UC testify.
Oh, they.
I'll leave it to that experts. For us, it's unclear.
Okay, so then maybe UC when they come up.
Yeah, they've got some big multi-billion-dollar projects that they're going to talk about.
It's
Senator Pavley, any questions of the Treasurer?
It's a state authority. So,
anything further, sir?
No, I just wanted to highlight the point raised initially by Assemblymember Eggeman's questions, and that you just pointed out the last, right? The general obligation bonds are materially different than the revenue bonds because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the state of California versus a specific revenue stream that you alluded to in regards to the revenue bonds. And so that's why the different courses and different histories in the past.
Just one other quick question about these delays, so that if you wanted to do a revenue bond and you go out into the market and you price it, so this is the interest rate that you can get for this bond, and now all of a sudden you have to put it in the ballot and it's not till the next November, how do you determine pricing on something like that? Because you don't know if interest rates are going to go up or down.
Yeah, that creates greater uncertainty, which could act to the detriment of taxpayers. And then when you think about what happens economically, right, you're subject to the market and what's happening in the economy for a long period of time, and right, you could see incredible disparities arise. Right, the benefits you're accruing for that particular debt issuance versus watching price inflation increase dramatically or deflationary impacts having impact in our pricing being incorrect.
I guess as I think about it, you could actually have this on the ballot. The interest could go flying up. And you can't, and we could be in a situation where you can't even pull it off the ballot. I guess you wouldn't have to issue them. Maybe, I don't know, what you do when the voters vote on something like this. You're now obligated to go out and spend a lot more money on interest rates. If interest rates go up, I'm just thinking out loud, but no response. But
yeah, the lessons learned in 2008, we would be taking action inconsistent with that. Right, we were supposed to engage in better risk identification, risk mitigation, and this, in fact, exposes us to greater risk.
Well, thank you. Senator Hernandez, would you like any questions of the Treasurer?
I just got here, not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Pavley, anything? Okay. Sir, thank you, and thanks to your office for putting time and attention to this stuff. It's very, very important at this very first hearing. I really, really appreciate it. On behalf of Chairman Gomez also, he had to step out for a moment. We're deeply, deeply appreciative of this. Thank you so very much for appearing here today.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you,
guys. We're going to stay. Okay. We now have the team of our cabinet secretaries, Secretary Laird and Secretary Kelly. Welcome back to. Oh, the proponents next. I'm sorry, I was trying to pay attention. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm out of order here. Initiative proponents, gentlemen. I'm too anxious to get you up here. I'm worried about your schedule. Let me get Kurt Onito, from Nielsen Merksimer, and anyone else? Kurt? How do you pronounce your last name, Kurt? Oneto? Okay. Is there anyone else with you? Okay, and I just want the record to reflect that we certainly invited anybody else who wanted to come, and I also want the record to reflect that apparently there's a gentleman who I've never met before by the name of Mr. Cortopassi, who's the proponent, and I personally called him to invite him. I don't know if you got that message, but I did just to make
You
sure.
did, sir. He was unable to make it today.
Okay, very good. Okay, please.
So, Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to be here for the first SB 1253 hearing. I'm excited about that. What I'd like to do, with your permission, is to briefly explain what the measure does very quickly, because it's very simple and straightforward. And then I'd like to dispel some of the misinformation about the measure in terms of what it does not do. So the measure only does two things. First, it requires voter approval before the state commits more than $2 billion in revenue bonds to any state project. First. Second, it gives the legislature the role of putting the revenue bond proposal on the ballot for the voters' consideration, over $2 billion. So it does two things that aren't allowed really today. Voters don't have a say in major revenue bond projects over $2 billion, and in many instances, the legislature does not have a role in revenue bond projects because the state agencies already have existing statutory authority to issue those revenue bonds, so they don't have to come back for the consent of this institution. So it guarantees the voters a role, it guarantees the legislature a role in the state's largest public infrastructure projects. And I can talk about the agencies that have pre-existing revenue bond authority if you'd like, but there's several. That's all the measure does. Moving on to what the measure does not do, clearing up some of the misinformation, it does not stop any particular project at all.
Let's stop what, I'm sorry?
It does not stop any project. It merely requires a vote before projects with more than $2 billion in state projects worth more than $2 billion in revenue bonds can proceed. As the treasurer stated, local governments are specifically exempt in the measure. Cities, counties, school districts, special districts, community college districts. In addition, the University of California is constitutionally exempt from the measure's requirements under Article 9, Section 9 of the California Constitution, as interpreted by our California Courts of Appeal and our Supreme Court. I have case citations for staff if they'd like that. So there's no real possibility that it could apply to the University of California. That's the public position of our campaign. And to the extent there ever was any ambiguity on behalf of opponents of the measure or others, our campaign is going to continually to state publicly our belief that it does not apply to the UC under applicable controlling law, and that those statements will be made in all of our public statements, our ballot arguments, et cetera, and the courts would refer to those statements in interpreting the measure in terms of voter intent. So there's really no possibility that it could apply to the University of California under the rules of statutory construction that courts use in interpreting ballot measures. That's correct.
But that's okay.
As interpreted by the courts. Disaster response would be unaffected. When there's natural disasters in California or any state, the Federal Emergency Management Agency is required by law to provide 75%, at least 75% of the funding to reconstruct, repair, rehabilitate public infrastructure. The Federal Highway Administration provides 100% of the funding to fix roads after a natural disaster. On federal highways, scales down to about 80% for state highways over time, but it's the massive amount of the funds come from the federal government. We do have the California Earthquake Authority here in California that can issue revenue bonds. That is one state agency that does. However, if you look in the insurance code, Section 10089.29, the maximum amount of revenue bonds that they are allowed to issue is $1 billion set in statute. So that could actually be increased another billion before any vote would ever be triggered under this measure. So that's, again, disaster response, really not an issue. Another thing that I've heard a lot of folks talking about opponents in the course of this effort is a definition of project, what a project is. The definition of a project is not included directly in the measure. Some think that's a weakness. I think it's a strength. We did not want to include a straitjacketed definition. We wanted to leave it up to the courts to construe that term. And why? In the general obligation bond context, general obligation bonds cannot be issued for any purpose imaginable. The Constitution, Article 16, Section 1, states that revenue bonds can only be issued for any single object or work. So there is a term already in the general obligation bond context which restricts the ability, the parameters under which general obligation bonds can be issued. Now, that's been in the Constitution since 1849. Over the last 166 years, our courts have not had any trouble interpreting that term. It hasn't caused any problems in the issuance, finance, taking to market general obligation bonds or general obligation bond funded projects. I have full confidence that our courts are just as capable of interpreting this measure and providing a reasonable definition for the term project, so it's workable for the state of California going forward, so the amount of disruption will be minimal. So again, this measure is just going to apply to those small handful of projects that have statewide impact because of the sheer magnitude, over $2 billion. And it'll be limited sort of to those projects that the courts are going to have an easy time identifying. It's not going to be a sky is falling type of situation. And again, setting aside the definition of what a project is, the opponents in their documents have stated they have cited to a portion of the LAO's analysis that there's some uncertainty of what a project is because it's not defined in the measure. Their representation of the LAO's analysis is a little bit misleading because on that very same page, a few paragraphs down, I think it's 2 paragraphs lower, the LAO says, but in any event, and I quote, in any case, there would be relatively few projects large enough to come under the measure's requirement for voter approval. So I'm confident if the LAO were here, they would reiterate that point because it's in their analysis. So in any event, it's going to be a small number of projects that really have statewide significance, that affect millions of people based on the cost. And again, in terms of public infrastructure, it's not going to be as disruptive as opponents would argue. The $2 billion threshold as a practical matter is going to limit the number of projects it applies to, again, to that small handful of projects that have statewide significance. There's also, we have history on our side. In the general obligation bond context, voters since 1900 have approved 78% of the general obligation infrastructure bonds that the legislature has placed on the ballot. So there's no reason to believe that so long as the legislature continues to put on projects, smart, well-thought-out projects, that voters would approve them at any less rate. So this sort of, again, the sky's falling notion really isn't borne out by history. And on top of that, a relatively small portion of the state's overall infrastructure funding comes from revenue bonds, and a very small portion comes from revenue bonds, over $2 billion. So again, the intent of the measure is to focus on those small handful of projects that have statewide significance because they're so expensive. They affect millions of people, whether you want to call them ratepayers or users. They're people here who are living and working in California and are going to end up paying these costs.
Very good. Questions from the members? Senator Pavley, please. And then
Yes,
Senator
I wanted
Wynn.
to get back to
I'm sorry, you were first.
what the interpretation could be regarding which projects these affect, and you were particularly talking about it wouldn't affect the UCs. I'm not an attorney, so you can help me here. On page 2, Section 4, it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, all revenue bonds issued or sold by the state in an amount either singly or in the aggregate over $2 billion, notwithstanding. So doesn't that open that up?
Not with respect, it would for everybody but the University of California, because under Article 9, Section 9, the Supreme Court, in 2008, in McClosey versus University of California, the court explained the autonomy of the regents, stating that the regents are a branch of the state itself, and the regents, as a constitutionally created arm of the state, have virtual autonomy and self-governance. In short, the university functions in some ways like an independent sovereign. And they have co-equal constitutional autonomy under Article 9, Section 9, right. But this is...
Notwithstanding, I'm just saying it could be subject
But
to...
you can't have one provision of the Constitution as a higher authority than another. So this is in one article of the Constitution, Article 16. You have Article 9 for the UC.
This is a constitutional amendment.
And so is the University of California's constitutional autonomy. Yes, that's right.
But don't you, just if I could add to your comment there, if I could.
I'm a middle school teacher.
But this notion, thank you, this notion of Article 16, you have competing constitutional provisions, and this specifically indicates that Section 5, it should be liberally construed, and further specifically sets forth what exemptions there are. Doesn't it, at least in your judgment as a good lawyer, raise a question to you that's going to then be litigated when somebody at the University of California tries to issue a bond? And so now you're trying to take care of important issues affecting the education of folks in California, and all we got is Lawyer Full Employment Act?